To order at 6:00 p.m. for our joint finance committee. How is everybody doing today?
Well.
All right. Well, wonderful, wonderful. The agenda was been sent out. The aim of tonight's meeting is multifold. One is to review what we did in the last meeting and answer any outstanding questions. We'll also define initial scope and get agreement from both the school board as well as the Board of Supervisors on the scope of our work. We'll also do a section where we will present the budgets for each board to the other board and allow time for questions. There will also be defined periods of time for public comment throughout the meeting, and we'll let those know when it happens. The initial public comment will come after the conversation around the scope before both boards vote on the scope. And then there'll also be public comment following the presentation of the budgets, as well as the discussion on identifying the gaps between the budgeting process. And then we'll wrap up with any action items and next steps and next meetings. Do we have any questions about that? We're also keeping Luttrell Tedlock and his family in prayer in the passing of his father-in-law, I believe. So we'll keep them in prayer this time as well. Pass it over to Dr. Pika to talk about the scope initial, which we defined in a meeting recently.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Blizzard. Real quick, for the last set of meeting notes, were there any, I had some additional changes or thoughts. Was there any thoughts, or did anyone else have any thoughts on the last set of notes? I had a couple items that were not included, and I want to make sure those get included. It was mentioned that we have to restore community trust in the boards and also restore trust between the boards, so we want to make sure that gets noted. We wanted to make sure we identify reasons for and resolve any communication breakdowns between the boards. We wanted to make sure there were no surprises for either board with respect to the budgets, that all questions get answered in timely manner, and that meeting summaries, action items, and materials are publicly posted. So those were the items that I didn't see identified in the notes, and I just wanted to make sure that those got in there because those were some key priorities we discussed. So absent anything else, we'll just move on to the scope. So we actually, as tasked in the last meeting, Linwood and I met separately and had a really good conversation around the scope. We were looking at the conversations that this group had, experience he had from prior to this group being formed, and then also some community input. So what we looked at for the scope was that the short-term focus, and I want to make sure this is clear for everyone in the audience because there was conversation at the last meeting around what would be short-term versus long-term. There might be things that we have to put in a parking lot while we're in this group because we have to focus on the budget. So the short-term focus and scope of this joint working group is that the 2024-2025 Northumberland County school budget is completed using two measures. One, in a timely fashion, meaning there is approval, or I'll use the word concurrent, absent appropriations, I don't know what the legal word is, approval of the school budget by the Board of Supervisors at the April 2024 meeting, provided that the school board approved budget is submitted in January 2024 per the calendar, and that final appropriations may need to be adjusted pending state funds. So that's what we thought as a definition for timely. Then transparent. The community is very interested in a transparent process, as are both boards. And transparent, we defined using Virginia code as well as community input. The school budget will be submitted with a summary at the major classification level with line item detail to facilitate analysis and reporting, and the processes used to develop, analyze, and approve the budget are fully explained and made public. And those processes include both the county processes and the school board processes. So the reason that we focused on the types of the line item and the classification is Virginia code requires both. The school board is required within 15 days of the budget being approved to submit a line item budget to the state. So clearly it's already done. We wanted to make sure, Mr. Brand, at the last meeting you said, look, we need to make sure we're not creating extra work. We were very sensitive to that. So these the measures for timely and the measures for transparent are not going to create extra work for anyone because these formats are already prescribed by state law. So that's where we landed with timely and transparent. And I'll stop there and have a discussion here, and then we'll open it up for conversations.
Do we have any questions between the two boards about the scope, or any, in terms of the details of it, or? Okay.
I just think the scope is on point for where we need to start.
I don't have any questions.
I appreciate y'all getting together and working so hard and coming up with such a very good detailed scope that literally speaks for both boards. I appreciate that.
I want to verify the superintendent. How does it feel to you?
I think it's a great idea, and I'll echo what Mrs. Obier just shared, that I appreciate the time both Dr. Pika and Dr. Blizzard have taken to create such a thorough, comprehensive scope.
And then I'm 100% for it.
Public comment. Is the space open now for the next 10 minutes for public comment on the scope that has been defined before we come back and make a decision? Do we have any public comments?
Is there anyone online?
Online?
There are 3 online.
Any public comments? Hearing none, I guess what is our process for approvals with this? I'm assuming this is voting for the 4 members, essentially.
Or is it consensus? Because it's
consensus?
not,
Has to be consensus.
right, we're not Robert's rules,
I guess since we're not,
Agreements, basically.
a decision-making, yeah.
Yeah, decision body.
decision makers for both boards, I think we as the 2 boards in the committee need to agree to carry it back to our boards for
Because we're not,
approval.
we're just representing them, we're not speaking for the
Right.
full board.
So I think that's the direction we need to do this, and
Carry back with endorsement? It sounded like to me that this group endorses.
I believe so. I think that would be the better way of doing it.
That,
It's an endorsement, it's a recommendation from this committee
Recommendation from the
Right.
committee.
to the boards.
Right. Yes.
Recommendation, okay.
Recommendation for the boards.
and see if they have any changes or additions to make.
Okay, we'll get that emailed out, so you'll have that, it's also be part of the record here.
Okay.
I know we have board meetings coming up soon, so we need to
Yes.
make sure that gets out and distributed in advance, so we'll have time to read it and review.
Right, so, this is a process question.
I think if we're going to recommend it, I think each individual needs to state that they, for the record, that we recommend taking it back to our boards.
I would like to recommend that I take it back and this was equity.
This is not a motion, I can't second,
Nope,
but I fully agree.
thank you. Good job.
Dr. Blizzard, can I make one comment? Or is it too late? Did I miss it?
You missed it, but what is your one comment?
I
It's,
just want to, anything that comes out of this committee, could I request that goes to all board members?
That's what we're doing right
That's
now.
what it's fine.
Like all the emails go to all board members?
So we're posting everything publicly.
Well, but the emails that come to, between the.
No, that would not be, I think county attorney's not here. That's the process I'm trying to get to. We can't communicate directly with the full boards. So what we're going to do is, I guess, Drew, I'm going to send you this email which has, and if I'm speaking out of turn, somebody correct me. Right, so Drew, I'll send you the email that has this language. I mean, I can give you this piece of paper too, but there's no point retyping it, right? And then you guys will put it for this group to see, and then this group would then send it to their boards. We can't, yeah.
correct.
No, I just meant somehow we should, the whole board should be informed of everything it is.
I think that's.
That's why
Yeah.
that's why we're in the process of taking everything back to our boards.
Yeah, so what happens is that we can't send it to the boards directly, what she is saying. So it sends through county administrator who sends it forward to the representatives, and then they send it to the boards.
Yeah.
And the boards receive it. the
So I know
boards
it's a
will receive
process,
it.
but
It is
thank
a
you.
process,
Yeah.
yes.
Now, we have Obeer, yes, I'm sorry, Dana, yes, Denise, yes, Jimmy, yes, Richard?
Yes, we'll send it back to the board here. We have a board meeting next Thursday, so
Thursday, yes.
it'll probably be on the agenda for
Okay,
that.
so I need to get this, if not tonight, tomorrow morning, I will get this over to you so that that process can move forward.
And the
Okay,
school board's the following Monday, I believe, yes.
okay, so then everybody have it. Okay.
One thing, can I ask everybody to speak up louder,
Yes.
much louder, speak into the microphone?
Get closer, I guess. Okay. Thank you for the initial scope. At this time, we're going to have presentations. The presentations are going to run in this format, and you will understand the process. First, the aim of the presentations is for each board to educate the other board on how that board does its budgeting process. There's questions on the transparency of budgeting, so we want to give a overview to each board from the other on it. So first, the school board will present its budgeting process to the Board of Supervisors, and it will be a 20-minute presentation. Then we'll have a 10-minute time period for the Board of Supervisors to ask questions to representatives from the school board about the budgeting process. Following that, the Board of Supervisors will present their budgeting process for 20 minutes to the school board, and then the school board will have 10 minutes to ask questions to the Board of Supervisors on their budgeting process.
And in fairness, one thing,
Yes.
Dr. Blizzard, in fairness to the county, because Mr.
Oh, yeah.
Tedlock, who is the
Tedlock's not here.
expert on the budget, isn't here to answer the process questions, we would still like all the questions
Ask the
asked.
questions, right.
So that we can record them and make sure that we get those answered. But in fairness to Drew, I think it'd be an awkward position for him to have to
Right.
answer those on such short notice.
That's right, and we'll be able to capture those and bring those back to the school board for resolution
ASAP.
ASAP, yeah, basically. And then, as best as we can, we'll spend the next about 10 minutes doing what we think of as a gap analysis to figure out where our processes between the school board and the Board of Supervisors do and don't line up, and begin to rethink what needs to happen. The reason we have this conversation is because there is a joint board meeting scheduling both boards. I don't think that date's being pushed around, but we want you to go back and rethink what your processes look like before your next board meetings, which are coming up in the next week and a half or so, in advance of the joint board meeting, to make sure we have an aligned process going into basically December for both boards. At the end of the gap analysis conversation, be a period for public comment for 10 minutes to ask any outstanding questions the public still has at that point in time. And then from there, we will then close and do wrap up and determine the next steps. So this time, we'd like to begin with the school board's presentation of their budgeting process.
Thank you to Dr. Blizzard and Dr. Pika. And in front of you, I've provided a paper copy of the presentation that we will be working through. We also have the presentation featured on the screen, and the county administrator is in receipt of the presentation electronically. As you can see, this evening's focus is the budget planning presentation for Northumberland County Public Schools. And I'm going to walk you through with slide numbers. I'm moving to slide 2, and we're going to talk about the purpose of reviewing the budget basics. Our first purpose is to provide the Joint Finance Committee with a basic review of public school budgeting in the Commonwealth. And second, to provide a basic review of how the school division identifies budget priorities for the budget proposal. Moving to slide 3, we have our Director of Finance, Mrs. Tara Booth, here this evening, and she's going to be reviewing budgeting and planning and the processes and activities that we follow.
Good evening. There's several things that we look at when we're working on our budget. So we look at student enrollment, the forecasting and the monitoring. We look at staffing projections, class size, teacher-pupil ratios. We look at our expenditure estimates. That includes personnel and non-personnel costs. We do budget monitoring and forecasting, looking at revenues and expenditures, and periodic trend analyses. There are some major revenue sources. We receive money from the locality, from the state, and from the federal government. Typically, local funding takes up about 40 to 45% of the general fund. However, because Northumberland's local composite index, or LCI, is 6971, that means that locally we have to support 69.71% of the school budget. The state funding typically makes up about 45 to 55%, but in our case, because our local composite index is so high, that's about 25%, and then federal and other funding generally is approximately 3 to 5%.
You moving to slide 5?
We're going to slide
Yes.
5. And these are ways that we can capture expenditures that the school board reviews, as well as the supervisors. If you look at expenditures by major program, we're looking at regular education expenditures, special education, CTE, which is an acronym for career and technical education, gifted education expenditures, other programs such as athletics and co-curricular activities, summer programming, adult education, as well as our pre-K programs. We also look at expenditures by major function, and there you can see categories such as instruction, administration and health, transportation, O&M, facilities, debt service, and technology. And finally, expenditures can be looked at by major type, including personnel services, employee benefits, purchased services, utilities, supplies and materials, as well as capital projects and equipment. Ultimately, the budget process, this year we've moved it up in order to meet that January deadline. So we'll be reviewing that calendar with you. The school board work sessions on the proposed budget will be taking place from November through December. And we are hoping that our school board will adopt the budget proposal with adjustments in January. At that time, we will send the budget to the county administrator for consideration, as well as the Board of Supervisors. We have published our public hearings already in the newspaper, and on slide 7, so we'll need to advance to slide 7. You can see that in October, we did a lot of seeking budget input from school leadership teams, school employees, students, families, and the community. And that kicks off our November timeline. So at our next regular meeting, which is November 13th, the school board will have a preliminary budget discussion, and we will be hosting public hearing number 1. On November 20th, the school board will have a budget work session to prioritize budget requests. On November 30th, that's something we want to make sure that everybody takes note of. That meeting has been set for a joint budget work session with the Board of Supervisors, and that's November 30th at 5:30 p.m. That takes us to December, and on December 5th, the school board will have budget work session number 2. On their regular December meeting, which is December 11th, we will have a draft of the budget with a budget discussion and public hearing number 2. And then finally, right after we come back from the winter break on January 8th, at the regular school board meeting, we'll have a presentation of the budget with what I explained earlier. We're hoping our school board will approve our proposed budget on January 8th. I'm moving to some artifacts now that start on page 8. Something our school board reviews, obviously our focus is on our students and on their achievement and on their progress, and we need to make sure that all of our students are performing to the best of their abilities and have everything they need to be successful. One way of looking at student achievement is through the school quality profiles. On page 8, this is the website, or across the Commonwealth, the 132 school divisions, you can look up their school quality profiles here. So you visit the Department of Education website, and you can see if schools are accredited. So if you move to page 9, this details what is accreditation. And keep in mind that Virginia's school accreditation system is measuring performance on multiple school quality indicators. And this includes overall student achievement in English, math, and science, also looking at achievement gaps in English and mathematics and student engagement. When we look at these report cards, we can see the goal, hopefully, is that the report card is green. So if you see a green, that means that students are meeting or exceeding the state standard. When we look at the report cards, you may see yellow. That means that students are near the state standard or making sufficient progress. And then next, if you see red, that means students are performing below the state standard. If we move to slide 10, this is where anyone can go. You visit the Department of Education website. You can search for Virginia School Quality Profiles in their search box, and then you put in your school division, Northumberland. And that takes you at that point to slide 11, where you can see how the schools are performing. And at the bottom of slide 11, you'll see that all of the schools are fully accredited. So we're very excited about being fully accredited. As we move on, the school board looks at how each individual school is doing. So slide 12 is featuring the elementary school. You can see that the 2023 accreditation status is accredited. Number of school quality indicators at level 3 below standard, 0. That's very good. Accreditation status last year, accredited. And the elementary school is doing so well that they've actually been granted triennial accreditation. So we're just extremely proud of how they're doing. And when you look at slide 12, you can see all those greens. We don't have yellows or reds because our students are performing at a very high level. If you look at slide 13, this still is focusing on the elementary school, and you can see this is focusing on achievement gaps in English and mathematics. Frequently, questions come up, what does that mean? What are you looking at? So we're looking at student groups, which may be Asian, Black, economically disadvantaged, English learners, Hispanic, multiple race, students with disabilities, and white students. This is a remarkable evidence of our elementary school's hard work because you can see we are green. So that is quite an accomplishment. All right, we're gonna go to slide 14. This is featuring our middle school. You can see that in 2023, the accreditation status is accredited. The number of school quality indicators at level 3, which is the red below standard, is 0 of 6. That's very nice. The accreditation status last year, the middle school was accredited. Something that's a little bit different from the elementary on slide 14, you can see that science is an area that we're working to put more supports in, as well as, and that's the science academic achievement, as well as English achievement gap. So you see those yellows. Let's move to slide 15. Here you see the achievement gaps in English and mathematics. And you can see that our Hispanic students are at a level 2. So that's an area that's going to be having more support. This is in English. And you will see our students with disabilities. They have a red there. That is not good. They need more support with English. And students with disabilities are also showing up with a yellow in mathematics. So the board, when they review this, will be talking about instruction and how can we put more supports in place to move the scores to green is the goal. Next, you'll see on slide 16, this is the high school. The 2023 accreditation status, fully accredited. Number of school quality indicators at level 3, 1 of 9. Accreditation status, last year accredited. The high school historically has done very well, and you can see they have a triennial accreditation from 2020 through 2024. When you look at how they're doing, we see that 1 red, and that's why up above it says 1 of 9. They are struggling, as I shared with the supervisors last month, with chronic absenteeism. So we have all-in tutoring money that was awarded recently, and we are allowed to use money toward chronic absenteeism to promote students coming to school regularly. So we are putting an emphasis on encouraging our high school students to be in school. If you look at page 17 or slide 17, this is showing achievement gaps in English and mathematics. Look at all those greens. This is very, very nice. It's very good. It's showing achievement gaps are frequently a place where you're going to see yellows and reds. So you can see that both the elementary and high are doing just a great job with all of their students. Let's move on to slide 18. Another thing that our school board looks at when doing their budgeting, they look at the average daily membership comparison. So we wanted to share that with you. The board also on slide 19 is going to be looking at students with disabilities, whether it's a special education student or it could be a 504 student, looking at the students with disabilities and making sure we have the appropriate resources at each of our schools. And moving on to slide 20, the school board looks at the overall demographics for elementary, middle, and high schools. This information is pulled from PowerSchool, which is the reporting system that we use. And you can see that, one thing the board definitely is looking at is student-teacher ratio. So they're looking at class sizes, example, the first row there is pre-K, total in the grade level 55, et cetera. And they're examining that and then looking at student-teacher ratio. If you look at slide 21, this is an example of some of the numbers attached to the teachers as far as class size goes. And again, these numbers are pulled directly from PowerSchool. So we wanted to give you an example of
Slide 21 is on the screen.
that information. Thank you, Dr. Blizzard. Slide 22 deals with the standards of quality. These are set forth by the Constitution of Virginia, and it requires the Board of Education to prescribe standards of quality for the public schools of Virginia. So the standards of quality, that's a document that's accessible on the Department of Education website, and it's prescribing the staffing that must be included at each of our grade levels in each of our schools. And then if we progress to slide 23, other things the school board is analyzing as they put the budget together. They're analyzing the budget requests from the online survey, looking at budget requests from the Northumberland County Education Association, also looking at requests from the Community Action Committee for Educational Equity. They're examining the salary scales and looking, considering pay increases. The school board will be looking at the local choice health insurance increase, decrease, whatever happens with the local choice to factor that in. They will be looking at the transportation fleet needs, the make, the model, the year, the mileage, the conditions of the transportation fleet, and also looking at recommendations that come out of meetings with the leadership team to determine needs and savings opportunities for the coming year. If we progress to slide 24, the school system does participate in regional programs We participate in the Northern Neck Regional Alternative Education Program, the Northern Neck Technical Center, as well as the Chesapeake Bay Governor's School. All of those, each of our board members serves, many of our board members, I should say, serve on these other boards, and budgets are made there, and then that, there's a cost to participate, so that is built into our budget once we know if there's an increase, a decrease, or no change at all. Moving to slide 25, the board also is analyzing capital outlay requests. We work closely with our county administrator's office to make sure that we have all of that in. I believe, Drew, that's due very soon.
The 15th.
Yep, the 15th. So looking at those capital outlay requests. And then that takes us to a conclusion with our revenue recapitulation with Ms. Booth.
So the state has a document on their website that you can go into, and it's all by ADM, or average daily membership. So they have their number that they think your ADM is going to be, and then you can adjust it if you think it's going to be different. And then their funding is based on the number of students that you've allotted for through that average daily membership. This is what the screen looks like, and you can go in and you can actually see what the funding is supposed to be for each category from state revenue.
Thank the school board for presenting their budgeting, the process for budgeting. Now I'd like to open the floor up for around 10 minutes for any questions from the Board of Supervisors.
So I have questions, if I can go ahead and go. We'll be quick.
It was on 16.
Why do you have so much trouble with students being absent? Just don't know.
I mean, why at the high school? I think it's more challenging at the high school because they are more independent at that age, so many of them drive.
Well, that's the school I'm really talking about,
Yes,
high school.
yes.
Yeah.
But what we do with that, Mr. Haney, we focus with weekly attendance meetings that we have every Tuesday in each of our schools. And we're trying to incentivize consistent attendance. It doesn't have to be perfect attendance, but we need our students to be there. And we need parents, families, community help spreading that message. 10 days, once a month doesn't sound like a lot, but if a student is absent once a month, they will show up as being chronically absent, according to what the state uses for their calculation tool. This is not unique to Northumberland County. You can imagine that high schools across the Commonwealth and the United States struggle with attendance in the secondary level, especially high school.
All right. One other question. When you have your public hearings for the public to come in, how much input do you get from the public, and how much of that do you actually use?
I feel that we typically have input from the public during public hearings. I'd like to turn that over to Ms. Obier and Ms. Mazik.
I think a lot of times you get more input from your surveys, and I think it's just more convenient. And not a lot of people are public speakers. They are intimidated by getting up to a microphone. So I think having those surveys available for so long, that's where we get most of the public input for our budget each year. And back to the part about absenteeism, and this is just my opinion. There was, and I don't want to keep going back to COVID time, but there was so much freedom at that point for that age where they could actually work and make money and then do their schoolwork, an hour or two at night online, and they got used to it. And it's hard bringing that age group, whether it was, 9th through 12th, bringing them back into coming to school every day and not, wanting to make that money.
Yeah.
That's just my opinion.
Got anything?
I don't think I have anything else to add to what Mr. Beer said regarding the absenteeism and why. I mean, that's the question that we're trying to answer and trying to find an incentive for, you know, to help them want to come back to school and not be absent. Right now, there's so much going on in the world that tempts them to do other things. They choose to do it. So, I mean, we're looking for the magic bullet.
No pun intended on the bullet.
They,
Not bullet, yeah.
yeah, they just.
We know what's the golden
They just
solution.
have,
We're
they
good.
just have more freedom. They really
Yeah.
do. It's hard to rope them in, and I get it, but
And they're
that's
different.
such a crucial time.
And parents are different
Correct.
during these days. They let them have
Parents are totally different.
We
the
can't fix that with the
freedom.
budget.
So,
Back on track. Jimmy, sorry.
The students with the disabilities, and I think you touched on this a little bit, but they group all those kids in that one category, no matter what their disability is.
Yes.
So when it comes to any type of achievement, it's kind of hard to meet every child's needs to actually carry a good level to a level 2 to a level 1. So you're in a happy medium with a level 2.
You could look at it that way. We'd love to see it as a green and be a level 1, but you're absolutely spot on.
And I can understand with the Hispanic children, you know, with English. I mean, if you send me
But they're-
somewhere another and I got to speak Spanish, I will probably.
But
be a
they're
level 3.
outscoring, they're outscoring the other categories in science and math.
Our
So-
Hispanic students do extremely well.
Right.
So we have really involved, supportive families, and we just appreciate it. And when I go and, you know, present in other places, Northumberland is a very special place because we are unique in how small we are and how connected we are, and our families are very involved in their students' lives. So we're just blessed, and I think our community too. It's just a really tight-knit place. So we have a lot to be thankful for.
Mr. Brand, did you have anything else? All right, here I go. Ready? It's going to be rapid fire. So one, congratulations on the certification and accreditation. I think
Thank you.
that's astonishing. So a lot of what I share will probably sound like a critique, as it is. It's not lost on me that the teachers work extremely hard and that the school board and the administration is busting their hump to try to make things work, okay? So one, I don't want us to revert back to what the state says should be a good teacher ratio, because that's 24 per 1,000, which is 1 to 47. And depending on which stat we look at, which day for reports you guys have, it's either 1 to 7 or 1 to 10, which is much better than 1 to 47. So I think that's something that we want to be cautious about. The questions I have on, this is on page 3. So it looks like about 18% of our students are in special needs. So Mr. Brand, to your point, we've got of the population size we have, around 18% are in special education. Nowhere in here does it show that you look at past expenditures when you're preparing your budget. That's budget 101. So I don't understand how we can be doing a budget if we're not looking 3 years back at what past expenditures are. And if you look at what the school board has requested in various accounts, for example, in the instruction account, last year it was $3 million underspent. So I think we really need to start looking, and I'll have the same questions for the county. Past expenditures, the strategic plan, nowhere in here does it say you guys look at the strategic plan. The school board did a lot of work to put together a strategic plan. I will argue that those metrics, there are no metrics, they're generic metrics. The last strategic plan you had actually had better metrics. Nowhere in here does it show that you review the strategic plan. There's no analysis of the proficiency scores. So the school gets their accreditation and the standards of quality is based on the pass rate. You can't hire a kid with a pass rate in English, right? If you look at the Northern Neck Planning Commission survey of employers, they don't have people that have certain skills. That's in the proficiency rating. And we've got kids that are scoring under 50% in proficiency in English, under 25% in some other proficiencies. So while we might be looking at what the pass rate is, that's minimum qualifications. And I think we probably need to start looking, or I would encourage us to start looking at what the proficiency rate is so that we can actually start getting kids to where they can be employable when they're out. Local required matches. I looked at the Department of Education website, and it looks like Northumberland is far exceeding what the local required match is, unless I'm reading the charts wrong. and I would love some education on this. In some categories, it looks like the required local match is 1.6, and we're spending 7 million. So depending on what that's for, how it's used, nowhere in the budget did I see where you guys look at the local required match, and I think that absolutely has a bearing in what your request needs to be from the county. For example, nowhere in here do I also see an analysis of current state law. So the budget just passed recently, and yes, as you guys shared at the last supervisors meeting, there's, I hate this term, free money. There's money that's going to come from the state for, what is it called, the COVID gap, where you can do the tutoring during the day.
It's all in tutoring.
Yeah, it's all in tutoring, right? That doesn't cost the county anything, that part of it. If you look further down in the section of that bill, there's a section there about a 2.5% raise that does cost the county something. You're only eligible to get some of these other things if the county has a local match. And so one of the things that I don't see in the budget preparation documentation is an analysis of the state law, an analysis of past expenditures, or an analysis of your contractual obligations. Because if you've got contracts that are coming for recompete and those costs are going to go up, you got to have those included because there's out-year expenses. So if you look at your expense reports for every year, you've got like the lawn person is like, I think 30-some thousand, Honeywell is like 80-some thousand. There's these huge costs. Are those contracts up for recompete? When do they expire? Are there option years on them? Are the costs going to increase? And so I don't see any of that in consideration of the budget. So if in looking at all the analysis, there's a lot of work that's done here. What concerns me, if you will, about this, and I know, Drew, it's not going to be you, but get ready. What concerns me about this is there's no analysis backward looking. I don't know how you build a budget forward looking if you're looking at planned expenses without actually looking at what you spent. And particularly in the IT arena, if you look at the IT expenditures for the past 5 years since 2017, and I know I'm talking super fast, guys, but I'm trying to keep on track. If you look at the expenditures since 2017, they've been relatively stable, which is surprising to me that we got through COVID without a bump up in technology costs, even if money came from the state somewhere that had to be reflected in the budget somewhere. But the instructional costs went through the roof. And I think one of the things that, one of the reasons that we had talked about the line item level with the chart of accounts, because every year you guys have to do that report, the chart of accounts, right? Every month you have to submit that to the state. That's what the state law says. It does. It says you have to submit a chart, the expenses in the chart of accounts. I'll get the quotation on the section. So if you have that information, it would go a long way in helping us understand why that particular category has gone up so much. And I'm not asking for anything that's contract sensitive, personnel sensitive, or otherwise sensitive. It's taxpayer dollars in that budget, and we should see where those are. And so I think that's the page that you have these expenditures right here, these all have a chart of account category. Mm-hmm. And you used it when you did the adult education, you explicitly asked for money in that particular line item. So I know you guys are keeping, the software has to keep it in that way. So just publish it in that manner. And then when you do your backward analysis for the budget build, first look at what you spent. And this also tells me that this isn't necessarily zero-based, it's incremental, which means you kind of took what you did before and just added to it. And I would argue that what that does is just have inflationary costs, because every year you add 3 or 5% onto what you asked for last year, and it just keeps going up, and we never go back to baseline. So one of the questions I also have is, what year does the school board believe is a good budget baseline? Not saying you go back to that year, but saying when was the school the healthiest? So if you've got 18% of the students that are in special needs and you don't have the teachers to help them, that's probably not a healthy measure. Proficiency scores should be a healthy measure. When you ask about input, I thank you very much for asking the input question. I have a document I'd like to share with the board, this group, and I'd like it entered in the record. What this is the comments that were gathered from the community at multiple listening sessions. So again, as the community rep, I had to make sure, and I flapped my jaws, which I can do pretty good. I went around and asked people some questions they had about the school board budget and the school. Frankly, it's surprising how there's strong support. I had heard a rumor that people aren't necessarily in support of the school. This is support for the school system. They don't want people doing babysitting. They want their kids learning. And so this is a good indicator. There's 2 pages here, and yes, these were entered in the survey as a group, but I'm sure they're entered in other ways too. This is a request from the community, these items, of what they would like to see the school focus on, and the top one is getting everybody's test scores up. So again, I applaud you guys for the presentation. Thank you very much for my thoughts, and if I talked too fast, I can go back and look at the notes and make sure that you can capture them. So thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Pica. We appreciate the feedback.
Question for Dr. Pica on this document. How large is the sample size that you pulled?
It was not large, it was under 20. But if you look at the number of comments that were received, it's phenomenal.
And where was this, and not asking who, but what location specifically in
Oh,
Northumberland
it was
County was
different.
this drawn from?
In different parts of the community. So I would be at the, getting my car oil change. I went to a community event. There was a meeting that I had gone to, and I just asked the people that were there what they thought.
Okay. It's
And
like-
no, it's not going to be, if you look at, from a statistical perspective, it's not going to be a statistically
Absolutely.
significant sample, and it's not going to be representative of the community. It's drawn from the people that I had access to at that moment.
Gotcha.
Yep.
Like the record to reflect that it's a population size of about 20 people representing the actual survey that's given, and what is being entered to the record. Any other questions from the Board of Supervisors to the school board at this time? All right, hearing none, we should now have the presentation from the Board of Supervisors on their process for budgeting.
I'm waiting for him to get it up on the screen. Everybody does have a copy in front of them as well. Okay, so we're just doing a budget 101 from the county perspective, just an overview of how we go about putting the budget together. Go to the next slide, Robert. The fiscal year is set by the Code of Virginia. It's first day of July through the last day of June. So the county looks at the budget as roughly a 2-year process for one fiscal year. We begin in September, we're sending out, this year, we're sending out CIP notifications to various departments, agencies, and including the school. In November, the budget letters will be sent out to the other departments and agencies for the remainder of the budget, and the CIP requests are due back. January, the department and outside agency budget requests are due back to the county administration. March through April, the board will receive the school budget. That it sounds like that has been moved up now, but this is how it's historically been. April through June, the board receives the budget work sessions, public hearings for the school and the county board budgets, as well as the CIP public hearing. And as a side note, pre-audit work begins for the current fiscal year. And July through June, we are actively managing the current budget and current fiscal year. In June, we have pre-audit work beginning, and then July through December, the audit of the previous fiscal year, and a presentation to the board by the auditors typically in December. The next slide, Robert. Just as a quick recap, this time of year, November, we are basically working on 3 fiscal years at one time. We're in the audit process for fiscal year 23. We're managing the current fiscal 24 budget, and we're in the beginning stages of the fiscal 25 budget. In the capital improvement plan, Code Section 15.2-2239, a local planning commission may, and at the direction of the governing body shall, prepare and revise annually a capital improvement program. This is a 5-year plan. It includes projects large size, non-recurring, fixed in nature, that have a long useful life, and vehicles in any project with a minimum cost of $50,000 is what we're looking at. It's reviewed annually, and it prioritizes projects on a timetable and how those projects are to be funded, whether it's grant, loan, or pay as you go. This year's capital improvement plan letters were sent out to the departments and agencies in September. The requests are due back November 15th. A subcommittee of the Planning Commission will review these requests and make a recommendation to the Planning Commission, who will review, and these reviews are going January through March. There will be a Planning Commission public hearing, as well as for what items they want to push forward to the board, and then the board will have a public hearing as well. The plan does not fund the projects. Approved projects are only included in the county budget. Next slide. Budget requests. This is just kind of a highlight slide of what items we're going to be tackling coming up. Okay, for budget request, 15.2-2503, all officers and heads of departments, offices, divisions, boards, commissions, and agencies of every locality on or before the first day of April each year shall prepare and submit to the governing body an estimate of the amount of money needed for the ensuing fiscal year. And Northumberland budget request letters are sent in November to the departments and agencies. They're due back January 30th, but that does not include the schools. They have their own schedule, as Dr. Wargo just presented. And the county recently started using, and it's still in the implementation side of software called ClearGov to work on. We're currently working on forms for the department and outside agency to provide that supporting documentation. So the budget information gathering for expenditures, the county departments provide information by completing line item budget for the upcoming fiscal year on needs and requests for funding by the departments and outside agencies. School division is done by categories as far as how it's submitted back to the board. Departments use the current fiscal year as their starting point to build their budget. It provides supporting documentation by letter and spreadsheet explaining funding requests or larger than normal funding requests if there are any changes coming up, whether it's mandated ordinance or state changes, staffing issues, workload requirements that are going to cause them to have higher than normal requests. We also examine health insurance cost, VRS cost, workman's comp, and other insurance costs. Review our debt obligations and any changes coming up there that we anticipate. CIP will again fold back into it at this point. And then we're reviewing contract increases to anticipate any negotiation changes. A good example of that is a regional radio program that we're going into. From a revenue side, information gathering, we obtain information from the treasurer. She provides an estimate of the undesignated general fund balance forecast for the end of the year, so we have an idea what our starting point for cash on hand will be. We work with the Commissioner of Revenue to determine what the personal property tax relief estimate will be, as well as an estimate on what we can expect in tax money from real estate, personal property, machinery and tools, and any other revenues coming in to the county, be it state or federal funding or grants. We get estimates on our EMS billing, and we'll have to, this year we'll start with what we anticipate getting from the new cigarette tax and the short-term rental taxes that'll be put in play for the current year. When we go to reviewing, we review our actual revenue estimates in prior years carefully to determine if these estimates can be increased or if they should be decreased based on what we forecasted versus what we received and any changes that we see coming. We do the same with expenditures line by line, and we reduce budget requests where the funds have not been utilized. In the past cycles or the previous year was a one-time increase, something that we knew was a one-time hit that caused it to go up that we know we can take out in following years. And then forecasting revenues, we're looking at additional streams, the short-term rental and cigarette tax for this year. Challenges that we deal with are if we have delays in receiving information for, sometimes we don't always get the health insurance information in a timely manner, and we don't always get General Assembly acting timely either, so delays there can impact budgeting time as well. So once we are at a point of having a budget somewhat prepared to where we're ready to start holding public hearings, we have to give notice of one or more public hearings at least 7 days prior to the date set for the hearing. The hearing should be held 7 days prior to the approval of the budget. And so if we had advertised a week ago and had the hearing today, the board wouldn't be able to take action until a week from today. And with respect to the school division budget, that should also be advertised and held 7 days prior to the approval of that budget. So we'd have to have, in no event, including the school division budget, shall preparation, publication, and approval be deemed as an appropriation. As you can see, though, we can have the school budget hearing and the county budget hearing at different dates. That those can be independent of each other. We still have to hear to it 7 days before and after, as far as advertising and adoptions of those hearings for either of those. So recommendations, so we had the budget in front of us, in front of the board, and we've had the hearings, and there need to be changes made. Staff provides the board with options based on comments made in public comment, needs of the community, and departmental needs. The goal is always to minimize any increase in potential real estate tax increases if it's not needed. And we evaluate larger expenses and start placing monies in the budget ahead of time to start preparing for those, for example, regional radio or reassessment. And so now we've walked through the process. We've got everybody happy. Board's making a motion and approving the budget. That's basically halftime. Next kickoff, we've approved the budget. Now we have to have the appropriation resolution because the funds cannot be expended until they are appropriated by the board. And this is a separate action from the adoption. So essentially it's process is approve the budget, approve what the tax rate will be for the coming year, approve the appropriation resolution, and approve the personal property tax relief resolutions as well. During the current year, we're always monitoring revenues and expenditures and comparing those to budget. If we've done everything right, based on general fund balance, we should not need a revenue anticipation note, but if there's issue with the timing of tax payments coming in and surprises come up, then there may be an issue where we need to do that, but that would require board resolution to do the note. And again, the budget is a plan. It has board action on it, but you can always have issues where you need to have an amendment to it. And the locality may amend its budget to adjust the aggregate amount to be appropriated during the current year. However, if any such amendment exceeds 1% of total expenditures as shown in the currently adopted budget, it must be accomplished by publishing a notice of a meeting, a public hearing, and once in the newspaper, have a general circulation that the locality has at least 7 days prior to the meeting. And in the case of an amendment, the notification can be 7 days ahead and have the meeting and public hearing, and they can take action, the board can take action that same day. It's no 7-day wait on an amendment, just on the initial budget. Some policies that we have not adopted yet, but we have been exploring and how they would help us, undesignated general fund balance. Davenport and Company have been our financial advisors. They recommended we pursue this, and we looked at it last year and made some strides towards it, but we never voted to formally adopt it. Another one we've been looking at is for staff to have a line item balance policy to where we don't have to have it bring us every little nickel and dime thing to the board, that staff could potentially have the authority to do changes within the budget for not categories, but just as long as it's no additional money, it's transfer from one line item to another.
Really?
That's something we're considering. There will be a whole policy about it and brought to the board for them to approve before we do that. And there may be some other policies that will come up that we'll be looking at. And just as a general comment, by practice, one-time revenues that are non-recurring are not going to be factored into long-term expenses. They would be looked at to compare to, for example, capital improvement if it's a large enough one-time hit. That is pretty much an overview of how the county goes about putting its budget together in any given year.
Okay. Thank you for that presentation. Now open the floor up for school board to ask questions to the Board of Supervisors regarding the budgeting process.
Oh, I've got some too.
Or anybody present, obviously, on the committee. Starting with the school board. Any questions?
For fear of, not fear, but not wanting to cause any disruption at this point, I don't think the timing is correct. I'd like for us at some point put on the agenda and revisit school funding in categories. I don't necessarily think that that's a question for tonight, but in my tenure of the school funding being in categories, I need some more information, but I don't want to get into that conversation tonight.
So in a future agenda item, a discussion on funding and categories. Okay. And I remember you talked about that at a board meeting too, a Board of Supervisors meeting. Added to the notes.
Any questions?
All right, here goes.
People?
Now, I know, Drew, I know you can't answer these, but I want these entered for record because I think these are really important. And it's extremely important to make sure that like there's a transparent process everywhere. So one, it's not zero-based. It clearly says in here that the county just looks at last year's budget and pluses it up. Bad, bad, bad. Why are the process separated? The CIP process is on one timeline and the rest of the budget is on another timeline. So if you're a person in a department that's doing a budget, you may not be able, there may be ancillary costs that are associated with capital improvements that may not necessarily be factored in at the same time that you're doing the capital improvement budget. So then you have to add that into your regular budget. Now statutorily, if that's required, then that might be a problem, but I don't understand why there's a bifurcation in the process because it's gonna cause errors in one side or the other depending on how the contracts are written. And if you've got contracts that are for services and or goods, particularly in capital improvements, like construction does that, right? So you have construction projects that are done that way for engineering services, but then maybe building. So that's one thing to look at. How do we make sure that the 1% isn't broken up? So the statute says that if there's going to be a 1% plus up, then you have to come and have a public hearing. So if I have a 3% plus up, what does the county do to make sure that that just isn't broken up into 1% 3 times? What are the checks and balances to make sure that that is being adhered to? To me, that doesn't look like there's enough time in this timeline for the county to do really good analysis. I don't know unless you have like a whole field of folks behind you that do this. In my experience, a 2-month window to actually get all the budget requests in, look at all the documentation, look at all the justifications, look at each category, because there's multiple divisions within the county, and the administrator's office has to be able to look at each of those divisions and balance it out. And basically what this timeline says is that you get all that information in April and you turn around 2 weeks later or 3 weeks later and you give it to the Board of Supervisors. That is a phenomenal amount of work and analysis that needs to be done to justify, right? To justify and make sure that happens, right? So that, I would argue that we would need to look at moving the timeline differently, particularly if you're not going to be doing incremental budgeting, because at some point, again, we need to get to where the county was healthy, and we thought that the finances were in good shape. Nowhere in here did I see how the county accounts for, that's going to sound weird, unanticipated expenses. So we know there are going to be disasters. We know there are going to be things that happen, and you can't always be dipping into the general fund. There has to be some type of balance somewhere. And I would argue that there might be some challenges in how the county's doing the contractual analysis, because not that long ago, the county administrator had to come to the Board of Supervisors because y'all missed a contract adjustment. It was to the tune of like a couple $100,000, wasn't it? You're being literal right now, sorry. So it was, and the board had to take action because there was a contract that had unanticipated cost increases. I don't know how that happens, because when you do contract planning, I guarantee you that your vendors are planning that far out, and they knew that. And by law, depending how the contract's written, they're supposed to provide you notification of any increases. So it was either in the option year, or it was or maybe you didn't have to pay it. So I think there needs to be a stronger look at how you guys are managing the contracts from the standpoint of what does your inventory of contracts say? Do you know when they're due? If you have contracts that are due to expire in 6 months, when do you start your planning for their replacements? What does that look like? Because that has a significant impact on your budgets, because if you award those contracts in a short period of time, the vendors can just ask what they want, and you're going to have to pay it because you don't have other options, particularly if there's contracts that are expiring. Local matches. Nowhere in here did I see anything about local matches. If I'm not mistaken, I think the library has local matches. There's multiple different organizations, not just the school, that get matches from the federal government, they get funds from the federal government, the state government, and other areas. And there's a local match that's tagged to those funds. And I think the county needs to have a good accounting of what's in that local match bucket, because that is almost sacrosanct money. Right? If you don't match these monies, you won't get these monies. And nowhere in here did I see anything that indicates we have a good sense of where those are. So we know that at a minimum, if the county budget's going to be, I don't know, I'm making a number up, If the county budget's gonna be 50 million, is 45 of that required for local matches and 5 of it discretionary? I don't know. Healthcare is kind of in the same bucket. It's kind of a mandatory expense. And I did see in here that you do look at past expenditures, but nowhere in here did I see that when you give the recommendations to the Board of Supervisors, does it show that you're including consideration of how different divisions have spent or not spent? And the reason that I raised my eyebrow at the line item is, I'm not sure if I'm interpreting what you're saying correctly or not, but I assume there are some divisions in the county that do really well at managing their funds, and there are other divisions that may have a challenge. And somehow that has to be balanced out overall. So what is the management process used at the county level to make sure that every month you don't have somebody overspending? Because I know, earlier this year, there was a problem with the lunch program, and there had to be like $300,000 that was found, or $200,000. So $200 for that, the money for that contract that Luttrell had to come ask for, the money for health insurance, those things all add up, and the county can't just make money like the Fed. You can't just make money, it has to come from somewhere, and based on that study that was done by those people you named, I can't remember their name right now, like they were recommending that we bump up the reserve fund.
Davenport.
Yeah, Davenport, because they wanted to make sure that there was a certain amount of funding left, which I know that was part of the genesis for the 23%. So I'm pleased in here to see that you do sometimes make recommendations that the taxes go down. There was a line in here that said, want to make sure if we ever lower taxes. In my experience, maybe I haven't lived here 100 years, so I'm not 100% sure if taxes have ever gone down. But I would argue that if we're going to undergo a reassessment in the next couple of years, and property values are going to go up and taxes are going to go up, you better darn well find a way to make sure they don't go up without having all these questions answered about how we're spending our money. So thank you for the presentation. Those are the questions that I have from the county perspective.
Can you get us a copy of those too? So.
I can, if I can read my handwriting, or I
Okay.
might have to listen back to the tape, because
Okay. No, I didn't know if you had.
yeah, some of them
them
aren't all prepared, they're just based on my
Okay.
past experience. And in my conversations that I've had with the same
Right.
people I was talking about, running around, they have a lot of questions of the county too, in terms of how the process is managed, so thank you.
Thank you.
Any additional questions to the Board of Supervisors regarding the budgeting process from those here in the committee?
I think we need to look at a grant process procedure to go along with some of the other policies that you may be looking at. And I think we need to see what our budget process is going to look like this year. I know we've had some talks about it in the board meeting, some changes need to take place, but I think, just speaking as a board member, I think we as a board need to see what that process is going to be in December. We'll get some kind of idea on what it's going to be. We got to give the expectations to the staff on what they need to do to help prepare for the budget and get that out ahead of the time.
Yeah, I think we need to, actually, I think what we need to do, I think we need to meet with staff and have a discussion on the budget of what we are looking for, what the process we would like to change or not change or whatever, but just do an in-depth study onto it here. I think we can do that probably, we can do it we don't have to do it on a regular board meeting, we'll just call a meeting and have it and discuss the process.
So we'll continue on with the process of, which they've already started for the Board of Supervisors, is the gaps. So the question is for Board of Supervisors and the school board, and hearing your individual processes. And our aim is, which you'll take back for the scope, what do you see as the gaps in the processes to achieve what we're desiring to have as a county? What do you see as the spaces where the processes are disjointed between the Board of Supervisors and the school board? I guess it's heavily a timing question ultimately, and even a resource loading consideration. Just what are your thoughts about that between the two boards at this time? Individually, board where you are, as well as critiques.
I guess I can answer that I can answer that in a question to try to answer your question. Dr. Wargo, the NeoGov, is the school system gonna use that as well? Or the same software as the county's using? I guess what I'm trying to get is, we need to have a process where the budgets mirror. The process mirrors each other. The format it's in, I guess, down to the software being used. Because from what I understand, last year when we had talks, it was just like totally two different budget designs.
We use RDA.
Okay,
I'm not sure what the county uses.
right.
That's our
What do
main,
you use?
RDA is our primary.
We use RDA for the reports, but we use the spreadsheet to build, the budget spreadsheet to build the RDA, excuse me, the RDA reports builds the spreadsheet that we give to y'all as.
Right. And does that, and Mary, I'm gonna put you on the spot. So, when we're going through the budget process, does that spreadsheet get sent out to all department heads? Or is that something you fill in?
That is something, what goes over to the department heads, and we're working on getting an actual form done.
Okay.
To go out to the department head and local agencies this year, to go with the budget request letter that we normally send out in, because it used to go in December, but we backed it up a month.
Okay.
To November. We started that, not last year, the year before, going into November to have the request back by
Okay.
January 30th. So what that does, once the requests start coming back from the department heads, is some department heads will put theirs in a spreadsheet form, and some will list them out by line item when we get those requests. So then when we get those requests back, then as we take those requests, move the different things that we have to move, and I move a lot of it in the spreadsheet, because we have to move it, certain things over to audit, we have to do it by audit, we move one fiscal year here, and then we do the current fiscal year expenditures year to date. So we use reports usually probably around February, March of expenditures, and that's what we fill in for that. Because we can't wait till the end of June 30th, we're doing a preliminary for the expenditures of the current fiscal year to end. So we're showing expenditures for the previous fiscal year, then we're showing preliminary numbers we've already used. Then we move forward in the budget requests going in, and Luttrell enters all the budget requests and works through all of that and analyzes back and forth where, when he brings it to y'all, potential cuts can be made, things that have been, we look at salaries, I put all the salaries in, I put all the benefits in. And those numbers on benefits, there's only one number on benefits, and that's FICA. And the rest of the numbers, VRS is on a biennium, that's set for 2 years. We're coming up on a new biennium, that rate, we're gonna have to wait for that rate to come down for VRS. Health insurance, we hope to have it in January, February. Sometimes this past year was later, so it kind of held us back. But we have to have that to y'all by the March board meeting in order to have it back to them by April 1st.
Okay. So the forms that you're talking about, that you're coming up with, and the process changes, that's something that will be shared with the school ahead of time to not delay anything that they're trying to get.
As soon as we,
Okay.
and see, we don't usually send out a budget request to the school. We send it out to all department heads and all the local agencies that are in our budget.
Right.
Of course, not the school and not social services. Well, let me back up on that one, I'm staying corrected. Social services, I do send them a budget request because they do submit their budget also to us. So we are looking at coming up with a form to get that sent out with the budget request letter for them to fill that out until we can get up and running fully in ClearGov. Because at ClearGov has been, we've been working in it, trying to get it all established. I'm working on the personnel side, Drew's working on the CIP side, Russell's on the budget side, so we're working in it. But to try to get those requests sent out through ClearGov this year, we're coming up with a different form this year until we can get that fully implemented.
Budget process. I'd like to see the budget process. That's a little better, so it's a better understanding when it comes to the board.
No, you say line up, do you mean line up in terms of formatting or line up in terms of timing or both?
We already working on the time. Looks like we're gonna have that taken care of. I just think that if it's all better in interpreting.
When you say format, clarification question, there's the format, which means the type of presentation it's in, and then there's the, what I'll refer to as the chart of accounts. There's the matching of expenses. So do you mean format in how it's presented, or format in personnel costs mean the same thing in both, right? Because
Pretty much it's both.
Okay.
Format as presented, because when we get have the line items and we can look down. I'm not saying anything bad, but, you know, when we get to school part, it's kind of like in a letter format. Question, and then I'll look at it. So deep in the numbers, but we don't get down. With a good understanding.
But it doesn't include, you can't do personnel.
All right.
He was trying to talk.
That's the sense that there's gin in there. No, just kidding.
The Gospel of John. We will continue with our meeting. Do we have any other observations? We made some great conversations just now in our gap identification within our, between our different processes. Anything? All right. At this time, we'd like to open the floor for public comment. We have a few extra minutes, so we'll give it a 15-minute window for any public comments regarding the processes that the school board has identified, that the Board of Supervisors have identified, as well as the gaps that they've named in their processes. Do we have any public comment, either here in the room or online?
I have a question. Gail Garrett, Greenville.
Yes, please come to the microphone.
This question is for Karen, Dr. Pika.
Karen's fine.
Karen. If you, I hear you say the zero-based budget is the way to go. And we do the incremental, and traditionally, because it's obviously quicker and easier to do, the zero-based budget, in your estimation, how long would that take? There's no way you can do it by January 8th, in terms of the school board and the county either. But how long would it take for everybody to examine every category, every expenditure, based on what you, I guess you would have to get each agency, in your case, the county, but we would have to get each director, like technology, facilities, whatever, to look at every expense and see what they needed to start with, you know, as far as their zero base. You need to bring it to zero and then start with, how long would that take?
So in my experience, I had an organization that was about a $15 million a year organization. So it's a little bit smaller than the school board, but not by much. And I did it in less than 2 months. And that was back in a time when we didn't have as much technology. So both organizations have technology. So first what you do is you start with personnel. Your personnel costs are fixed.
Right.
Right?
And a lot of others too.
Exactly. So you run the reports for what your personnel costs are as is. And so when you do the zero base, what you're looking at is what are my absolute minimum requirements for this year? And in that case, your absolute minimum requirements are your payroll, existing contractual obligations, which both the county and the school will have, because you've got to have somebody that's keeping a record of what your contracts are and how much is left on them. It would be fuel costs, right? Personnel insurance is covered in there. So the good news is all this stuff is already online because you're tracking it. What you have to do, the tougher part is actually drawing the line between what is a requirement and what is a nice to have. And so where you start to have the conversations is, for example, I would cut, let's say you cut Chesapeake Bay Foundation. It's one of the expensive line items. So what you do is you zero out everything that isn't either legally, contractually, or contractually required.
Excuse me, what do you mean Chesapeake Bay Foundation?
The school gives money to Chesapeake Bay Foundation. I don't know.
She may be in
That was a field
Chesapeake Bay
trip.
Governor's
Oh, you're
School.
talking about
No,
governor's
it's the
school?
foundation. It's in your list of expenses.
Well, then that's a field trips.
Right, maybe it is, right, but that's a zero, but you zero that out, because it's not a legal requirement or it's not a contractual requirement. So when you zero base, that's what you do. Then, the hard
You
part.
Add them back in.
The hard part gets to be what exactly then needs to happen. So you would argue, right, the person who does the field trips would argue that you've got to have tactile experiences for the kids as part of their education. Okay, well then how many do you have to have? Well, you have to have these 6. For the county, it would be, we need a radio upgrade or something, right? I don't know what it is. So I don't know that you could get it done this year. I think it would be a super heavy lift, because if people don't understand what zero-based budgeting is, they probably need an explanation of what it is. And then, in my experience, the food fights over who's considered mandatory versus who's considered optional.
Who?
What?
In terms of what?
What, right? That gets to be the challenge. So it's not something I would argue you could do in this budget cycle. I think it's something to be aspirational for next year.
Well, you know, when we do certain expenses, they come up. They're not something you can actually budget in, like field trips. for
No, they
example.
have to be.
Well, they can't be.
You absolutely budget everything. You absolutely can budget everything. Now, the amount, so what you do is you budget
don't think
100, let's say
I
you
have to
budget
disagree.
100,000 for field trips. That's what your budgeted amount is.
Oh, I see what you mean. Yes, but individually, we
No,
can't
you have a
say
line
that.
item, right? That's why you have the line item. You have a line item
So
for
you would
transportation.
budget a certain amount for your field trips, but, well,
Right,
that's
and
what
then
you
once
do
you,
now,
once you exceed that cost,
based
you're
on
done,
what you
right?
used before.
But that's not,
But it's based on incremental because that's what you used.
because, right, that's what you did before, and nobody's ever gone back and said, do we really, that's why the expenses are so important. And then the risk with expenses is, oh my, I have this money and I have to spend it this year. If I don't, I won't get it next year. And so you have to be super careful. That's why the zero-based is so important. Otherwise, what you do is you have people spending money on pencils and paper and you know, a certain chair or whatever, because they have extra money in their budget, and they know if they don't spend that money, they won't get it
They
next
won't get
year.
it back.
Which is why the management is so critical, which is why the software is so important.
Well, everything I'm reading about zero-based is it's much more efficient. I've just had a question on how it possibly could be done,
Not this year.
not this year.
I don't think it could be
so,
done.
yeah.
Unless you have superhuman people and they
Yeah.
do nothing but eat, drink, and sleep
No,
numbers
seriously.
for the next,
Sarah's like, no.
right? People have lives. No, I don't think it's something that can be done this year. I really would like to see it done next year, and, no. I don't think even a department in the county could do it, because if you don't know what it is, you don't know how to do it, and then again. And it's cost effective too, because yeah. Thank you for asking.
It is a consideration. I mean, maybe somewhere put as a note to consider how to think about that as a process for both boards. Any other comments from the public, either here or virtually? Anything on? Any other comments? All right, we'll close the comment section out. We'll now move on to wrapping up the action items and the next steps. Speaking with Dr. Pica about kind of how we can move forward with this. I believe that a couple of things are outstanding action items. The first action item is that Dr. Pica will get the scope sent to Luttrell and Drew, and we'll get that sent out to the boards, and then the boards will vote on, send it for recommendation from this committee to the Board of Supervisors and the school board at your next meetings this month for approval. And then we will come back and report out at our next meeting. We'll talk about in a second the output of that. What else do we have as output things? There was something else.
The spreadsheet was going to go from the county.
Yes, spreadsheet was going to be sent from the county to the school to make sure that we get the reporting in a format that is comparable to the rest of how the county receives the rest of their budgeting information. Should be easier for, just for your interpretation.
Changes in process is identified.
Oh, yeah. And there's also going to be your joint board meetings coming up soon. So we do desire for the board to consider from this conversation any process changes to consider for this budget year that you will do, and have that conversation with your boards. And then kind of whenever you have the joint board meeting between both boards, we do desire for both boards to see these presentations with the revisions inside of them. So the whole board can see how each board does the work and have the conversations beyond just the two representatives from each board represented here. And we do not believe we will need to meet in the month of December because the next big benchmark is going to be, I believe, January 8th is a school board's meeting, which you will approve your budget. So we're thinking that, and then the Board of Supervisors will get that budget immediately, and then the board meets on January the 11th. And we're thinking, based on timing, to allow Luttrell to have time to review the document. We're suggesting January the 25th as our next meeting of the joint committee. Is that possible for everybody's schedule?
Let's see.
6 o'clock.
I'm good with that.
Yeah, I'm good.
It's far enough out.
Yeah, I can make
Ms. Mazik? Okay.
I'm good.
All right. The next meeting of the Joint Finance Committee will be on Thursday, January the 25th, 2024 at 6 o'clock p.m. We will anticipate probably an hour and a half at most meetings. Most will be report out, and we'll send actions to the group as to what is expected. Does anybody have any outstanding questions before we adjourn the meeting? Question. 2 questions. Question up here first.
No, go ahead.
Dana wanted me to send the spreadsheet also to the school. If I can get a copy of the chart of accounts that y'all use to incorporate into that spreadsheet, because y'all's chart of accounts look differently from our chart of accounts.
Sure.
So if you can get that for us, I can incorporate that into that new format for the request.
No
If that's
problem.
agreeable.
It's pretty big. It's a lot of pages.
Oh, I know. But y'all want it in a spreadsheet?
Yes.
Let's do right. If we're gonna do this, let's do it right.
I mean, if that's how y'all want to do it, just like we do ours by the line item, I'll need those chart of accounts.
Yeah,
Yep.
I think that would simplify everything on both boards.
And I know it will have to be broken down by school
Yeah.
and administration, so, if I can get, because y'all so different than ours, so I can't give you what we use, expecting y'all to be able to follow it.
Okay.
So if y'all do that, we can get that done.
Okay.
And I know I said in the last meeting, but just make sure that we have the notes that we can share with both boards. And I would like to see something added to our agenda committee reports. And that would be the time to update the board
Yeah, all
Oh,
right.
in regards to.
I'm happy to do an executive summary. It won't be the minutes that you do, right, that y'all do, but it will be an executive summary, just like we just talked about the action items and major areas, and get that over to Drew, and then that way both groups can have it for, okay.
And I just, like the reason I said before, that we got the same information and we can provide that same information and both boards get the same information.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's why, when it came up for board member comments at our monthly meeting, that's when I presented what we talked about, and the next date of the meeting, the next meeting date. So that's good.
All right. Anything else before we come to a close?
Well, it looks like we're making some progress.
Yes, we are. We thank both boards for their participation and input to this. Thank Dr. Wargo, Tara. We thank Drew. We thank Luttrell in his absence for all he is doing. Let's keep him in prayer. I'd like to adjourn this meeting today at 7:38 p.m. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
To the public, thank you.
Thank you.